So a client of mine a client and friend of mine, Brian Werner, vocalist for Vital Remains, death metal group, was getting tattooed one day and had the idea of this blood guitar, and so we got to talking. He got to mentioning it to Gary, and that's how the whole thing started. Gary was totally open to whatever. He was, just like super into the idea, and so we went backstage at a Slayer show in Long Island a while back and collected 18 vials, and those were the vials that became this Eclipse. That's the name of the piece, the guitar, through ESP. I had corresponded with Gary. I wanted to know, wanted to get as much background for what he was envisioning, and he was pretty much like putting it in my court. He was just kind of saying, I want something evil, something sick. Those were the operative words. And we kind of boiled that down to a classical depiction of Lucifer. And that's what the composition became. So it's this kind of composition of Lucifer with a lot of movement to it. I feel like it has, like he's moving through the flames. So the flames are coming up the side of the guitar, like the guitar's on fire almost. And we've got this cathedral piece of this in the background, and it really turned out very well. And this is a piece called Stings of the Lash. I started it in 2004. The concept of the piece was this kind of transcending these circumstances. So the 6 panels on the side are these stings of the lash, right? And so they're like these 6 events in time that I had identified that, on one hand, in some sense, strip me of a certain level of life or humanity. On the opposite end of that token, strips so much of the superfluous away. The central figure is depicted standing here, not quite alive, but not quite dead, right? And you've got these 3 realms. You've got terrestrial, celestial, and this kind of realm beyond this. And the top panel, where the figure's head is, it depicts these 2 nerve cells, these 2 kind of neurons trying to communicate, and the message is being diffused by the subject's will or consciousness. And it is what I feel like is the difference between us and other animals, is that we can direct our will and exercise it over circumstances in ways that are unique to humans. It took, I think, around 3.5 months to paint. I wouldn't be able to say how much blood went into it because it was a whole lot at the time, but it was around 3.5 months of pretty continuous work. Yeah, working with blood is certainly different than working in other mediums. First off, it needs to be refrigerated. Well, there's many things. First, it has to be collected, and that, if you're going to get any reasonable amount to work with, it's going to be collected intravenously. So it would need to be first extracted, refrigerated. I work from several consistencies, ranging from just a drop or 2 of blood in some water to just the opaque blood. Every surface needs to be covered with a barrier. You need to wear gloves. Afterwards, everything needs to be, sprayed with a kind of maticide. So yeah, it's not the most practical thing to work with. This is a piece called The Plunge, and it depicts this female figure kind of growing out of this cliff, the edge of this cliff, and she's obviously 9 full-term pregnancy. In the silhouette in the background, there's this indication of the umbilical cord in the way of a vine coming off of this tree and kind of trailing down. And birth and death and the symbiosis of the two, of life and death, it's a common thread that runs throughout the work. It's something that interests me tremendously. You know, I had worked in all other media prior to that, and I had arrived at a place where I felt like I was comfortable with the subject matter, but the actual, subject matter, like the figures I'm rendering and the compositions, but the actual substance that I'm rendering the work with, there's this disconnect. If it's coming out of a tube, it's man-made, it's manufactured. If it's coming out of and then I started experimenting with blood in small amounts of my own, and it was there for the first time that something very real and true was communicated intrinsically, and could not lie or be reproduced by any other means. And so it was like this, not only this catharsis and this release of sorts during a time that was pretty intense in my life, but it was also the completion of a kind of conceptual circle, in that I'm using blood, which is technically considered to be tissue, human tissue, and I'm using this liquid tissue, or this liquid flesh, to render human figures. So it's this kind of amazing process, and there I'm able to reconstitute this substance into a new composition and create an entirely new human being, and illustrate something that would have been otherwise incommunicable any other way. And when I say that, I really mean it. This piece here is called Autopsy of the Soul, and it's the title piece in my newest body of work. And I chose it for this background because I like it so much. The essence of this new body of work, which is an examination of not only the depths of my being, but the depths of our being. We're living in such a strange time in terms of greed and corporate greed, and how that factors into every aspect of the functioning of our world. And as an artist, I can only speak from an artist's perspective, and looking around and listening to music and looking at art, and so much has been so diluted, not diluted, diluted too, but diluted for so long. It's like it's as if we're dead. It's like the whole species is asleep and just allowing this to go on. And I feel like there'll be a pendulum swing. And what I mean by that is like a kind of almost the renaissance of beauty and truth in our current age. I had been making art from a very young age. And if I had to sum it up and how it started, it really started as the best way to kind of disconnect from my environment at the time. Like growing up was kind of nuts in my house or household or whatever you want to call it. Drawing was a way to kind of go to this place and put everything I couldn't share anywhere else, and that's really how it started. And I just continued, and it became so much more than that, obviously. I went to Fiorello LaGuardia High School. People are often familiar with it from the movie Fame. I didn't graduate, and I went on to put myself through about 3 years of art school or college before I withdrew, realized I wasn't going to be doing applying this degree in any corporate sense, so I was continuing to make art for myself the whole time, and that's exactly what I did. I withdrew and I pursued my art full time after that. So this is a piece called The Mystery of Death, and the concept here is as soon as you're born, physically, you're dying. Prior to that, we almost exist as potential only, and in that sense, are eternal or immortal or whatever. And as soon as the sperm meets the egg, you're gonna die. You have a definite resting place in the earth. You have a limited amount of, sunrises, and a certain amount of microorganisms will consume you. And it's the only certainty. But it's this interesting enigma to me. So this is like primordial mother here. My circumstances in reality have kind of furnished my mind with enough material to work with for the rest of my life, I think. But in terms of other artists who have inspired me, I mean, on top of that list would be H.R. Giger. He would be, needs no introduction, needs no preface from me, man. This is Vincent Castiglia. Subscribe to Louder Noise, the loudest noise on earth.